Hello and welcome to ELT Chat, an educational podcast making English language teaching and learning more transparent. My name is Benjamin Stewart at benjaminlstewart.net. Before we get into today's topic, if you have any thoughts, insights, or would like to share any of your experiences regarding today's topic, feel free to reach out to me at my Twitter handle at BNLEEZ. Today I want to talk about ChatGPT, and I've been thinking a lot about how AI now has really reached a point where students can now generate a complete essay that is basically at a level that we've never seen before. And my initial reaction was, well, I'm not too overly concerned about English language learners that I have on a day-to-day basis using this in terms of trying to pass, let's say, an essay, pass it off as their own. Because as we become familiar with English language learning writing, it's pretty obvious when it's an original idea and when it's not. I don't see it differently than students just outright finding an essay or having someone else generate an essay with few grammatical mistakes, just because mistakes are very much part of the learning process for the English language learner. But I think it is worth a conversation and reflection, and maybe even talking within the academy, talking with other colleagues about how AI, or specifically ChatGPT, might be used in the classroom, let's say, to promote critical thinking. Today I want to talk about a recent video that I watched and also share with you two search terms that I was experimenting with using ChatGPT for the first time. And it was quite impressive. And I have some thoughts on that. We'll talk about that here in a few minutes. First, I want to talk about a video that I saw that was very insightful called "What Might ChatGPT Mean for Higher Education?" If you're interested, I share a link in the description. Some of the things that stood out as I was watching this video, some of the questions that came up was, what do we want our students to learn? And this is kind of an obvious question perhaps, but I think it's equally important when we're thinking about now how we're going to be dealing with AI, or how students will be using AI. And it, I think, is going to force some teachers, I should say, to reevaluate what they're doing in their day-to-day practice. Because if we're placing too much emphasis on the final product, on the final essay, if it's all about trying to get the best final draft and we're primarily only assessing that final draft, then perhaps we need to really take a careful look to see if that's really the best approach for evaluating a student's text. Because again, even, if they are relying on AI to generate these final drafts, then we're going to have some issues here in terms of what are we really want our students to learn. Now, as English language learners, if you have experience instructing students with their writing, you'll know that if you're using a lot of formative assessment and you're focusing a lot on the process of writing, taking them from, let's say, the brainstorming process, outlining and organizing, and even before that, the search process, finding strategies that students can employ that help them find what it is that they're needing to find. There's so much that goes into the writing process before they reach the final product, the final draft. And finding opportunities to assess that process, you quickly learn or become familiar with how the student puts together ideas, how they think, and how they articulate their ideas in text form. To the degree that AI doesn't really even come into the situation, because you quickly lose sight. If you look at an example of an AI, and I did, especially with ChatGPT, it was impressive in terms of the way that it came up with ideas and presented those ideas. But it's very obvious whenever you're working with English language learners, again, what their style is, how they think, even common problems. If you have some experience with teaching English language learner writers, you kind of begin to know what to look for, and you are used to seeing certain kinds of issues over and over. So again, I don't see much of an issue. I'm not too concerned about the impact that it would have in my own personal teaching, simply because most of what I do and most of the things that I discuss with my English language learners has to do with everything that happens before they finish the final draft. Really, the final draft is of lesser importance in terms of the learning that goes on that gets them to that point of making those final decisions about writing. Some other key points that came up during the video that I thought were, useful. Using writing to learn. Writing is thinking. Writing is an expression of an idea and the exploration of an idea. I particularly like that quote where we're really helping our students express their ideas and also explore their ideas as they are learning, not only at the beginning and the initial stages of the process as they're investigating and reading, let's say, primary research articles, trying to find support or evidence that will later go into a body paragraph. As they're writing their first draft and finalizing their drafts, they're also exploring these ideas where they are maybe revising as they need to, maybe even in some cases going back and adding information or evidence, maybe having to go back and even continue reading additional information as they are formulating their ideas and organizing their ideas, perhaps something's missing. So the whole process from start to finish is really an exploration of an idea, certainly. Most of what you do in the day-to-day is really not that valuable. There was one speaker in the video that just came right out and said AI is going to change a lot of what many teachers are currently doing in higher education. Now, this panel was talking in general, higher education in general, not specifically to language learning per se. But I agree that it's going to have an impact in what we do. And I'll get into that a little bit more here in a few minutes when we start looking at a couple of examples of some sample text that I ran in ChatGPT. Some questions that came up: what should you be doing differently? And this is really, I think, at the heart of today's podcast, is asking you as an English language instructor, regardless of your experience level, what kind of impact will AI have in your classroom? What kind of impact will it have in your day-to-day? How might you use AI? Will you ignore it? Will you have a conversation with your students, talking with them about AI and maybe even using AI in the classroom to promote critical thinking skills? Maybe it's directly related to writing. Maybe it's related to speaking, grammar, vocabulary. Maybe it's even related to pronunciation. Any aspect of English language learning, I think it's worth investigating and reflecting on the use of AI and how it might impact those different domains. What can you do better than the most advanced technology? I think this is one of the key questions that came up in this video, and it's something that I have thought myself for many years. Like, how can I add value to the English language learning experience? How can I add value every single day with my students as they come in to make it worth their time? I want to make every day with my students something that they learn something, or that they are getting something out of the experience. Now, I may or may not always achieve that. I may not always be successful. But I think this is a good question for all of us to reflect on, is to ask ourselves, how are we adding value? How could we add value? And I think when we are considering AI, I think the same applies. How can we add value? How can we provide a better experience than them just coming in and either doing their work themselves without any kind of teacher whatsoever, And this is not to go against autonomous learning and the values of autonomy, because I think that's also a very important aspect to the English language learning experience, is having students give them the opportunities to find their way, to see what they can achieve on their own, whether individually or amongst themselves, without any kind of intervention on the part of the teacher. This doesn't ignore those aspects of the classroom, but certainly we need to ask ourselves as teachers, as human beings, how can we add value that, let's say, AI is unable to achieve? And I think that will always be the case, where there will be some aspects of human behavior that, if implemented correctly, should add value to the English language learning experience or the educative experience overall. At the institution level, what can institutions offer learners that cannot be obtained elsewhere? So this is more of an institutional reflective question. From an institutional standpoint, what kind of experience can they offer that they can't get anywhere else? And every day this becomes maybe a more difficult type of question to answer, as materials, OERs, open educational resources, are now becoming available. They're becoming more prevalent. YouTube or videos overall are being presented in a way that students can now learn a lot on their own. What kind of experience now can the institution design and make available to students so that they're getting more out of the experience? So take a look at this video that I have in the show notes, and I think it's worth the hour looking and listening to their discussion. I think they are planning on having a second discussion on the same topic, and I certainly will be watching that as well. But very insightful. Thought a lot about my own context as an English language instructor, as an English language teacher, trainer. What kind of impact might this have on my own classroom, and how will I approach this with my own students? And right now, my initial feeling here is not to ignore it, but to talk about it with my students, to show them what is available. Because I think whether ChatGPT in its current form will continue to be made available for free or not, the genie's out of the bottle, so to speak. It's out there. It's going to now exist, whether it's this company or some other company, or maybe even it's made available as an open resource, as an open educational resource. It's out there. That's one thing that we can be certain about, is that this won't go away. This is going to only get better. It's going to just be more prevalent out in society, where students have this available and they are going to use it, whether we talk about it or not. Whether we decide to talk to or with our students about this capability now is really on us, but we can be assured that students are going to be using this. This is going to be a decision we all need to make right away, not only at the individual level, as an instructor, as a teacher, as an educator or trainer, but also at the institutional level. What kind of policies are going to be needed to put in place to address AI, essentially, in the classroom? Now, talking about ChatGPT, I was curious. I went in for the first time this past week and created an account, and I did my first search with ChatGPT, and I did the same search using exactly the same keywords in exactly the same order twice, because I was curious what kind of responses I would get doing a back-to-back search using the same search term. So the search term I used was 20-minute presentation on applied linguistics. Thinking, what kind of results would it give me if I were to give, let's say, a 20-minute introductory talk on the topic of applied linguistics? What kind of information might I receive? Well, here's the first attempt generated from ChatGPT. Probably took, I'm guessing, 30 seconds. It was interesting. The first time I ran the search, it took a little bit longer. The second time was quicker. But we're talking seconds here in terms of how long it took to generate the result. And this is the first attempt. It broke it down into a 6-point outline. The first point was called Introduction to Applied Linguistics. And it says the following. Define applied linguistics and explain how it differs from theoretical linguistics. Discuss the importance of studying language in real-world context and the various fields in which applied linguistics is used, such as language education, language policy and planning, language assessment, and language technology. Now, one thing I found a little bit interesting here is the first attempt where it says Introduction to Applied Linguistics. The last sentence that I read ended such as language education. It listed it out, language education. Number 1, language policy and planning. Number 2, language assessment. Number 3, and language technology. So you're not looking at the rest of the points that were listed. Logically, it would list out points like maybe the point number 2, then the first main point would be language education. The next point would be language policy and planning, and so on. It sort of does this, but not really. So for example, second language acquisition was the second point. The third point was language education. So it did mention that. It does mention point number 4, language assessment, that came from this list. And then the fifth point was language and society. So it didn't mention language policy and planning that was initially listed in the last sentence. And language technology, it did not list. So I thought that was interesting, okay? Because if they're going to list out here, it might be those main points, telling the audience basically these are the main points that are going to be discussed throughout the rest of it. And it kind of did that. It did it to a degree, but not completely. Probably in the future, this is going to improve. Well, the second point, they list second language acquisition. Describe the process of acquiring a second language and the factors that influence its success. Discuss theories of second language acquisition, including the natural order hypothesis, the critical period hypothesis, and the interlanguage hypothesis. Point number 3, language education. Discuss the principles of effective language teaching and learning, including the use of authentic materials, task-based language teaching, and communicative language teaching. Describe how these principles can be applied in different contexts, such as language classrooms, immersion programs, and online language learning. Point number 4, language assessment. Explain the different types of language assessments and their purposes, including proficiency tests, achievement tests, and diagnostic tests. Discuss how language assessments can be designed to be fair, valid, and reliable. Point number 5, language and society. Discuss the relationship between language and society and the various ways in which language reflects and influences culture. Describe how language can be used to discriminate against or empower certain groups, and discuss the role of language policies and planning in promoting linguistic diversity and inclusivity. And point number 6, their conclusion. Summarize the key points of the presentation and discuss the ongoing importance and relevance of applying linguistics in today's world. So again, they did divide it up into what I think are relevant key points. Again, those being second language acquisition, language education, language assessment, language and society. Now, we can debate on the order in which these key points were presented, but I think one of the key weaknesses in this particular example is the lack of coherency between the list that they present in the introduction and point number 1 at the end, again, where they list in this order: language education, language policy and planning, language assessment, and language technology. They don't mention in the subsequent points language policy and planning, and they don't mention language technology. So this is where, if this were to be brought into the English language classroom, I could easily see, as even in a writing class or even a public speaking class with English language learners, having them critique this text, to having them actually copy and paste this and bring it to the students and say, okay, what are the pros and cons of the way in which this text is being presented? And the things we're talking about here today, this would be something that could be brought to the students' attention for them to see, okay, there's some good aspects here to this text in terms of coherency, the way that it's organized, and perhaps there's some things that could be improved. We could then take it to the next level and say, okay, what would be the ideal organization of these key points and why order it in such a way, depending on, the target audience, depending on the purpose of the talk, and so on. All right, so this is the first generated text using the key term 20-minute presentation on applied linguistics. Let me share with you the second attempt, again using exactly the same search term. This time it divided up the ideas into 10 different points, 10 different key points. So the first key point simply says Introduction to Applied Linguistics, and then that's broken down into 3 subpoints. So there are 2 levels. This is basically a 2-level outline as opposed to a 1-level outline in the first attempt. So the point number 1, Introduction to Applied Linguistics, 3 key points. Point number 1, definition of applied linguistics. Point number 2, the focus of applied linguistics, for example, language education, language policy, and language technology. There's some repetition there in the key terms when compared to both attempts. And point number 3, the relationship between applied linguistics and other fields, for example, linguistics, psychology, and sociology. And that's, I think, interesting. They bring that up, which is a little bit different than when compared to the first attempt. So that's point number 1. Point number 2, examples of applied linguistics in practice. And this is divided into 3 key points. Point number 1, or subpoint number 1, language education, for example, second language acquisition and multilingualism. Point number 2, language policy, for example, language planning or language rights. Point number 3, language technology, for example, natural language processing, machine translation. All right, moving now to the third key point, tools and methods used in applied linguistics. Now, this is new when compared to the first attempt. The tools and methods used in applied linguistics is broken down into 3 subpoints. Subpoint number 1, corpus linguistics. Subpoint number 2, discourse analysis. And subpoint number 3, psycholinguistics. Moving now to the fourth key point, challenges and opportunities in applied linguistics. Subpoint number 1, ethical considerations, for example, language rights or language justice. Subpoint number 2, the impact of globalization on language use and policy. Subpoint number 3, the role of applied linguistics in solving real-world problems, for example, language barriers in healthcare, language learning in online environments. Key point number 5. Now, they have here, I think I misspoke. I noticed here in this example, there was a typo here. So I said earlier there were 10 key points. I misspoke. There were 5 key points, and this is the 5th key point, conclusion. Recap of key points. Again, in this example, the key points are, number 1, introduction to applied linguistics. Number 2, examples of applied linguistics in practice. Point number 3, tools and methods used in applied linguistics. And point number 4, challenges and opportunities in applied linguistics. And then the second part of the conclusion, after recapping the key points, the importance of applied linguistics in understanding and addressing language-related issues in society. So again, 5 key points, and these key points in the second attempt, the second search using ChatGPT, there are subpoints. This is basically a 2-level outline, which contrasts it to the first attempt where there's just a 1-level outline. But I think either way, it's interesting to see what kind of information is being generated here. And again, thinking about the English language learning classroom. And when you're making decisions about, well, how might you bring AI into the classroom? This might be an example here where we not only can critique, in this case, the first attempt, we might even compare and contrast and say, okay, what aspects in the second attempt, using the same search terms, which aspects of the second attempt are structurally more relevant or more important when compared to the first, and how might we even bring together these 2 attempts to make maybe the best, let's say, best outline for a 20-minute presentation on applied linguistics. So this is a question I want to pose to you as an English language instructor, a teacher, a trainer. How do you plan to approach AI? Have you tried it yourself? What are your thoughts? What are some challenges that you're going to face with your students. How might you use it in your day-to-day practice, if at all? If you do have any thoughts or insights and want to share those with me, I'd be curious to know how others are going to be using AI, your thoughts and opinions on today's topic. Feel free to reach out to me at my Twitter handle at BNLEEZ. You've been listening to ELT Cast, an educational podcast making English language teaching and learning more transparent. My name is Benjamin Stewart at benjaminlstewart.net, and thanks for listening. This is ELT Chat, an educational podcast making English language teaching and learning more transparent. My name is Benjamin Stewart at benjaminlstewart.net, and thanks for listening.